The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Sri Lanka's public transport system is characterized largely by overcrowded buses, antiquated trains, and inconsistent schedules. Chronic issues such as insufficient infrastructure investment, inadequate maintenance, a lack of modernization initiatives, and a culture of bribery and corruption. These are some of the issues which have contributed to this state of affairs. In such a backdrop, let's discuss the urgency of transport sector reforms. I'm so pleased to welcome to the studio Mr. Manjula De Silva, former CEO, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Good to be back on this show.
Lovely to have you back, Mr. De Silva. And joining us for the first time on this show, Mr. Fernando, mobility expert. Good evening and welcome, Sheran.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
My first question is to Mr. De Silva. When we take Sri Lanka's transport sector, especially the bus transport and the train transport. So when we take buses, passengers packed like sardines, drivers mostly engaging in hooliganistic practices, not caring for human life, property damage. Bus permits are a major mafia. If we take the train system in Sri Lanka, outdated carriages, frequent breakdowns, delays. Speak to us about how problematic this is. If you could set the stage as to where we are in Sri Lanka, and also how critical it is to reform the transport sector.
If you look at our transport sector, it has not kept pace at all with the rest of the economy. Even with regard to other areas which have moved to some degree. Transport has been stagnant. If you say over the last so many decades, there's been absolutely no progress at all. If you take transport facilities available today, I would call it uncomfortable, unreliable, unsafe, and inconvenient. That is where we are, and this is actually affecting all the other sectors as well. Because transport is a sector which is a supporting sector to the rest of the economy. Yeah. And other sectors depend on transport. And if you really look at it, Sonali, you'll find that a lot of the issues that other sectors face are sometimes a result of the chaotic status of our transport system. Let me give you a couple of examples, right? Now we talk about the productivity in our workplaces, and one of the issues that people often talk about is that people come late to work and they are always in a hurry to get out of workplaces, right? But if you really examine why this is happening, it's most of the time due to the fact that people have to commute for a very long period of time to get from home to work and from work to home, right? Sometimes that journey might take 2 to 3 hours. And if you miss your first bus or first train, that might add another 1 hour to your journey. So this is one reason why people are always, in a rush to get out of their workplaces. And likewise, if you also ask the question, why do most of the retail shops and small service establishments, why do they close so early? Right now, when you go to most other cities in the world, you'll find places open till fairly late in the night. But here, most people don't do that. Right? Again, the reason is the poor state of transport. Because if you keep it open beyond a certain time, you will find it difficult to provide transport to your employees. Now, if you have to do it at your own cost, only the large establishments will be able to afford that. And also, if you keep it open beyond that particular time, the number of people patronizing these establishments will also be very low. So you can't justify keeping it open, right? And okay, one more example if I would give you is the agricultural sector. Now, if you take the fruit and vegetable produce, actually the post-harvest losses are adding up to about 20 to 40% of the produce. And one of the biggest reasons is the poor quality of transport, because by the time it reaches the consumer, a lot of it is spoiled, right? So like that, when you look at most other sectors, the problems they face are often a result of the very poor quality of transport. And if we fix transport, I think it can help a lot of these sectors also to operate in a more optimal sense.
Sharon, why is it that Sri Lanka's transport system has had such a lackadaisical, backward looking approach? Why haven't we used the digitization tools like other countries? It's not rocket science, surely.
May I go back and start where Manjula stopped?
Sure.
And then come into this. And the first thing I'd say is that Manjula made the point about post-harvest waste. Let me make another point. I did a back-of-envelope calculation, and when the price of diesel went up by 30 rupees, the price of a kilo of vegetables went up by 10 rupees. But the cost increase of transport with respect to the 30 rupee increase in diesel is actually 1 cent per kilo. Okay, so it means the middleman has power through the system to increase his profit margin. That's the first thing. I agree with everything Manjula was saying, and if you take it as a mobility issue at a national level, there are three primary issues. Congestion, and congestion means that the average Sri Lankan citizen coming into Colombo to work is 3 hours on the road, right? So that's a national cost, it's a social cost, it's a cost to his family, The second thing is pollution. 51% of our total carbon generation is from the road transport sector, right? So that is a significant problem. The third element is we spend $3 to $4 billion a year out of $20 billion of imports on fuel for road transport, right? So these are three significant issues. From a personal point of view, because of all the reasons Manjula said, people are having to use private transport solutions instead of public. So you buy a bike, a three-wheeler, or a car. It's not an aspirational purchase, it is a requirement in order to live your life. At some point we researched why people buy bikes. There were two primary reasons. If you were working and your job required you to go from one place to another, you couldn't do it, you couldn't be productive in your job doing it through public transport. So you needed to buy a bike, and also if you had to work late, etc. The second element was that were buying bikes in large numbers, strangely, was students. If they had 3 tuition classes in a day, they couldn't manage it with, this is becoming a long answer, but so the reason that the transport, the reason for congestion, pollution, and the high expenditure on fuel is because of the lack of proper public transport. People have been forced to go into private transport solutions. Now I can come into digitization if you like, but this is the problem. And digitization can sort a lot of things, but we also need to move people from private transport back into public transport. In order to do that, the problems that Manjula is talking about in public transport need to be fixed, because otherwise you are just going to have more and more private transport. We don't have roads, we don't have the money, we don't have the money to import the fuel.
Mr. De Silva, speak to us about what measures can be taken to streamline the bus transport system in Sri Lanka, since that is what is used by a majority of Sri Lankans, especially the masses. I'd also like your input on these bus route permits, which the model of which is flawed.
I think we need a complete system change. right,
Okay.
in the area of bus transport. If you allow the current model to operate, like where buses are competing with each other, racing with each other to actually grab as many passengers as possible, right? And then sometimes, staying in one place as long as, it helps to get the bus loaded. Now, that type of system will never help us to reach the kind of standard that you and I want in public transport. If you want to have proper timetables to be adhered to, and if you want some kind of discipline to be there on the road, ensure that there is no overcrowding, right, then we have to change this model. The way in which actually we have liberalized bus transport is something, which you don't see in most other parts of the world, where you have these people owning 1 or 2 buses. They are also struggling to operate. They find it so difficult actually to make a profit, and that is why, you see this kind of undesirable competition on the road, right? So that's where we are, right? Now, if you want to solve it, then you got to go into a completely different model where each route, now when I say route, it's like say the 138 route or 154 or whatever, each route should be given to one single operator. And that should be done through a competitive tender process, right? So where you invite bids from operators, so they can be companies, they can be even associations where say the present bus owners get together, form an association and they bid
Right.
as a single entity, right? So where each route will be given on an exclusive franchise to one operator, right? So then they will have to adhere to a timetable. They will have to follow all the rules that are given by the licensing authority. Like, there will be a limit on the number of passengers you can carry, sitting passengers, standing passengers. There can be quality standards imposed, emission standards, all that can be done. And how you typically select is you select the operator who offers to run that route for the lowest fare.
Right.
Right. So then it's a competitive process. So who is able to offer the lowest fare will be given the contract, and they have to adhere to the terms and conditions laid down. Now, when you do that, basically what you're doing is you're taking the competition off the road.
Right.
There is still a competition, but there is competition to win the contract. But once it is won, then basically you have to just adhere to the terms and conditions laid.
Okay.
And of course, if you don't do that, then of course there will have to be penalties where the contract can be terminated and it can be retendered, for instance, right? Now, in a lot of places where this has been in operation, basically, you find a lot more organized, streamlined, disciplined operation, because they don't have to anymore chase after each other to load the buses, right? Because see, now in today's model, even if one operator try to follow some kind of a system, let's say they announce the times at which they will come and come to each bus stop and pick up passengers, somebody else will get there a minute ahead and take all your passengers away, right? So it won't work in the current system. So that is where this exclusive franchising of routes, I feel, is the way to go. And maybe if you can try it out on a couple of routes and see, I'm sure it will produce the right results.
What do you think is the reason for such a pilot project, which would be largely beneficial and transparent for Sri Lanka? Why do you think it's not being done?
It's very unfortunate, this thinking has been there for some time. I recall something like even maybe 20 years ago, this idea was there.
Okay.
Right? And at that time, I remember there was some discussion between the government at that time and even the private bus owners association, and from what I gathered, even the bus owners were not against it, right? Because actually, like I said, even to them today it's a struggle because you are operating 1 or 2 buses, right? You have to pay your leases, you have to pay for the fuel, you have to pay for your employees, and it's such a challenge, to generate adequate revenue to meet all those expenses and make a margin. So that is why they are compelled to operate in this manner, right? But if you take that away and you allow them to operate at agreed times, and also to make sure that there are buses running at off-peak hours as well.
Okay.
Now, another problem today that we face is beyond a particular time there are very few buses.
Sure.
Right? Because to them it is not commercially viable to run buses at that time.
Right.
But in other parts of the world, I mean, I'm sure you have experienced this, sometimes you may be the only passenger in a bus, but still the bus will operate at a given time. Right? So this is why I feel we need to try this out, and I'm sure it will produce the desired benefits. And also talking about the CTB, CTB should also compete with the other bus operators. Maybe they might be the most competitive to run certain routes, so
Sure.
let them have those. Right? But they also should not be running in competition with another operator. So if you stick to this one route, one operator model,
Okay.
actually this is how the London buses are run,
Right.
and in most other places in Europe, and even in recent times in certain parts of India. I saw in Bangladesh, Dhaka has announced, has introduced this type of a model.
Right.
So I think it's time that we looked at a complete change, without which I think a little bit of tinkering here and there will not produce the expected
fantastic.
results.
Sharon, from a sustainability point of view, how important is it for Sri Lanka to mainstream the usage of electric vehicles?
It is very important. I mean, every bus, I think the number is every bus produces something like 4,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year. And the point is, electric buses, electrification is expensive, and it was never something that was affordable. But that situation has changed with the price of lithium-ion batteries coming down significantly. So the price difference between an electric bus and a compatible diesel bus today is about $60,000. So the electric bus is more expensive by about $60,000. If you then compare the cost of running between a diesel bus and a petrol bus, the diesel bus costs more by about $20,000, right? So it means that the cost differential between a diesel bus and a petrol bus will be offset by the saving on diesel over 3 years. Now, how you could then do it, if you take the battery out of the diesel bus, out of the electric bus becomes the same price as the diesel bus. And then the battery you can pay for the battery, these models are available, you can pay for the battery per kilometer. For example, if you run 200 kilometers a day or per month or whatever. So, there are models that exist today to make the two, the financial viability of an electric bus is on the table today. Now, the previous question you asked me about digitization and Manjula's answer also, again, if you take the Mysore Transport Board, had a very interesting digitization program, and together with the recommendation that Manjula is making of the single operator, which they did, they also put in digital tracking devices on every bus. Now, the tracking device monitored how fast the driver was driving, how hard he was braking, how fast he was cornering. They set parameters, and if the driver exceeded any of those parameters, there was a loud horn at the back and it would blast off a huge sound in his ear. And so, subconsciously, the driver started over time driving within those parameters. They also did the digitization of the boards, the online tracking. So, for example, if you were wanting to get on that bus, you know where the bus is, you know at what time it will come to what bus station. They went a step further where parents who had children on the bus could track what was happening on the bus through cameras, etc. So, fairly simple digital techniques improved. And then the sustainability of what kind of bus, that again is on the table.
All right, fantastic. We go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
People shouldn't be afraid of their government. Instead, governments should be afraid of their people.
NPP is by design, and it's not only in Sri Lanka, even out of Sri Lanka as well.
I had to go to my cabinet minister secretary even to get a small thing passed.
That's a different question. The authorities are there. Why aren't you going in?
Integrity was compromised by the bribery commission.
Chairman of the party does not attend when you all sign a MOU with GLP and Nalagodeva, which is quite important.
Who was trying to safeguard the robbers of central bank.
We know
While
in Sri Lanka there are issues.
Inquiry was going on.
People wanted Gotabaya, right? People elected him.
But what we can see is that it has certainly stalled. There is no public record of what these cases were.
In particular, the things are very severe when President is also the Minister of Finance.
I will give you a post how it came about. It was not argued in the parliament. It was not even put in the cabinet. It was forced down the throat of the people of this country without an election.
මගේ අභිමන්ට මොකක් හරි කරදරයක් වෙලා තිබ්බොත් මාත් බලන්නේ අංකල් අභිමන්ගේ තාත්තා කියලා.
64 මායන් ඔක්කොම දාලා මගේ කොල්ලව අල්ලගෙන ඌව නැත්තටම නැති කළා.
මම දෙක්කේ නෑ. යන් මාතුව දෙක්කේ නෑ ලොක්කුනෝනේ. මට ජමා වෙන්න.
දැක්කනේ ආන්ටි. මුංග හොරතල් කළා මුංගෙන් ඇත්ත ගන්න බෑ. අංශය උඩ ගියත් බිම ගියත් මට කමන්නේ නෑ. හැබැයි අරෝගේ කාමරේට ගිහිල්ලා තිබ්බොත් මම තම්සේවයි ඌවයි යවන්නේ කොහෙටද කියලා මම තීරණය කරන්න. තම්සේට මම ආයි කියන්න තියන්නේ හරි.
නීල පබලු අද රාත්‍රී 9ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
ගන්න බලන්න ආපිට කතිරය. අංක 18.
අසාධාරණනේ මාරයා වගේ වුණාට සාධාරණනේ පිළිගත්තා වගේ.
වැඩි දේවල් ඉල්ලන්නේ ආප්පෙට 1යි 18ට 1යි.
කියා දෙන්න ආදරේ තරම් අද රාත්‍රී 8:30ට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
So the SLPP has no moral right, or basically they are lying to people if they are saying that they need power to do justice to this horrific attacks.
So I can assure you that when these latest crossover talks were happening, they're talking about 4 members in particular.
We couldn't agree with the decision to appoint Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe as the president. He opposed that and we went to opposition.
Then bring more women into the labour force. And it's not just for women. When you bring more women into, this is a huge section of the society that's left out of the productive economic process, right?
The issue that came about was the opposition was unable to read the writing on the wall.
We just can't go and argue in front of people that, we don't want this ex-gentleman and we need to get a Y gentleman.
There's a greater decline, no? Then that is the situation currently, but we have to fix somewhere now.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back. We're discussing the urgency of transport sector reforms with Mr. Manjula De Silva, former CEO, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Fernando, a mobility expert. Mr. De Silva, given the fact that a significant population also use railway transport, what are some of the improvements that can be made?
In railways also, there's plenty of scope for improvement, but there I wouldn't advocate something as drastic as what I proposed on the bus transport side, because railway, it is always better for the state institution to run the trains. Where countries have attempted to privatize railways, it has run into certain difficulties. So I wouldn't really advocate that, but there are areas where actually while the Sri Lanka Railways operate the trains, there are areas where you can actually bring in private sector participation. So just to give you a few possible areas, I mean, one would be the railway stations. Actually, the stations can be developed into multi-purpose complexes, right? I mean, like again, what you see in other countries where you have shopping, you have entertainment, restaurants, everything, right? And you have the railway station also on the ground floor. Maybe
because a large space is wasted.
There is a very large, actually the railways department is today sitting on some of the prime properties that you have in this country and in the city, but thankfully they recently advertised calling for expressions of interest. Which is a very welcome thing. So that means that, you know, the right thinking is there. So that is one area, right? Getting the private sector to develop these station complexes, and that will also generate some revenue to the railway by way of rental income, which they can then actually utilize to develop the tracks, invest in trains and so on, right? Then also another area is while the government railway operates the trains, you can allow the private sector to operate some carriages, right? Offering a premium service.
Sure.
Now, some time back we saw this, but then it didn't quite work all that well for whatever reasons. But this is something they need to reintroduce. Offer it through a competitive process, get the best people come in and operate a service targeting the premium segment. So actually it should be above the first class service that the government railway offers today. So you have the first class, then you have something even better, for which you charge a premium price. So that is one area. Another one is again like the restaurant facilities, the restrooms. I mean, all that need improvement, right? I mean, today again, you know, one should appreciate the fact that railways have started certain trains targeting tourists. I mean, which is good, right? I mean, they go through a scenic route and that has become very popular. But still, even there, the quality of food available, the standard of the restrooms is absolutely below standard. So these are areas where you can get the private sector to come in, right? So like that, I mean, there are a lot of areas for public-private partnership in railways where we could offer a much better quality of service. And for that, again, one other reform that I would recommend is the railways department cannot exist as a department and do all these things, right? I mean, it has to become at least a state-owned corporation, an SOE. Right? Because otherwise you can't get involved in commercial activities. Their current structure as a department is a huge inhibition in doing a lot of the things that we are talking about.
These are such fantastic suggestions. Why aren't we doing them?
If you look at various plans that people have developed from time to time, right? I'm sure many of these things are talked about, right? But in Sri Lanka, what we need is not more and more plans, but implementation, which is lacking, And also, actually, another area is now. If I also looked at some of the transport plans done over the last couple of decades, they talk about MRTs, LRTs, BRTs. You know, all these things are there, right? What you mean by LRT is light rail transit, right? Mass rapid transit. All that is there. But what they don't talk about is how do you finance them, right? You can have a long wish list of things you want to have, but unless there is a way of making it happen, government is never going to be able to find enough resources to put in, right? And when you get the opportunity like the LRT project, you know what happened, right? Now again, thankfully the government is talking to the Japanese, and I really hope that they can put that back on track, because that is something very essential in the city of Colombo. Just imagine if you have that elevated light rail system as planned from Colombo Fort to Battaramulla and from Boralla to Mardana. That was the original plan.
Okay.
Right? Now something like that can really ease the congestion and provide people a very convenient form of transport. But this again has to then get linked with the rest of the public transport system, so that the buses will feed passengers into the LRT, and also you have to make it accessible to the elderly as well as the disabled. So you can't have these elevated tracks running and make people climb up 100 steps to reach that. So you need to have the elevators, the escalators. Again, maybe build stations like the railway stations we talked about with all the other facilities, so that it becomes one single system connecting all these different forms of transport with each other, right?
Fantastic.
I mean these are things we can see when you go abroad. I mean, you go to places like Singapore, Hong Kong, most other places have that.
If I may just jump in there, the additional thing you could very easily do to link sort of clean transport, which is walking and cycling, to railways, is very simply, if you had a shower facility, a locker facility, and a laundry, you could cycle or walk to the railway station, have a quick shower, wear your office clothes, jump into a train, go to office, come back, jump on your bike or walk back home. So you're getting some exercise, all you need is bike parking and the ability to shower. I mean, one of the problems that we can't use walking and bicycles more is the lack of shower facilities at your place of work or at these sort of mass transit hubs, as it were.
Sharon, let's look at a few international examples. India and China boast of an extremely good railway system. What measures can be done to upgrade our own railway system?
Well, I agree with Manjula. I think the first upgrade is just the easy upgrades, cleaner, better toilets, just upgrade the administrative and the operational elements of the system. The second upgrade is a lot of our rail tracks, Manjula, correct me if I'm wrong, are still coming back from the British time, right?
Yeah.
So the gauges are off, and because of the tracks being sort of 70 years old, the speeds the trains can travel on is limited to ensure adequate safety. So the track upgrade is needed. The next thing is all our trains are diesel, and so I'm saying using our existing sort of rail stock, an upgrade to electricity is possible.
Mr. De Silva, when we take the bus transport and train transport, it's important to also talk about the interlinkage and connectivity. How can we ensure that?
Yeah, that is very important, what you call intermodal connectivity.
Right.
Because having these sort of independent, it's not going to help people, right? Because people would like to sort of maybe take a bus to the station, then take a train from there, do maybe the longer part of the journey by train, and then from that point onwards take another bus, for instance, right? So you have to facilitate that, and to do that you have to have more hubs like what we see in Makumbura, right? I mean, now that's one example, but only thing is just having one of those doesn't help a lot. I mean, you need a lot more like that, where now that's a good example, where you have the expressway coming there. So people, coming by bus on the expressway can then from there shift on to a shorter distance bus which will take them to the city, or take a train because there's a connection to the railway station. So like that, I mean, everywhere that is possible, you need to connect these, and not only physically, but even the timetables needs to be synchronized, right? So that somebody can plan a journey, because you don't want the bus to reach a station and to find that, you know, by the time you get to the platform, the train has left, right? So one has to think of possible journeys that people will take, right? So like at an airport, right? I mean, how, you know, different flights are synchronized in such a way that you can come, take one flight, then there will be a little waiting time, you take the next flight and go to your destination. So the same way, the buses and the train, there's no such thing called a bus timetable, right? Because it's never followed. But if we adopt that kind of a franchising model, and then you can definitely introduce a proper timetable for buses and then synchronize that with the railway.
Isn't it absurd that we're in 2024 and if we miss a bus, we literally have to look at the road and wait for the next bus?
Absolutely. I mean, so that is where maybe Sharon can talk a little bit more about how, like, you know, maybe with a little app, you know, you can really see how, you know, these things connect up, and you can work your way, you know, selecting the best route at that particular moment. So it can actually even start with a bicycle ride, and then maybe, you know, a bus journey, a train journey, whatever, right? So I think maybe Sharon, I'll let you.
Sharon, speak to us about how important it is for a digitization tool such as an app to be introduced to also cut across different types of mobility.
It is essential because don't forget, we are the whole object. The problem is congestion, pollution, and expenditure on fuel. That's the problem we are trying to solve. The easier solution is to move people from private transport to public transport, and so we need to make public transport that you're talking about has a generic name. It's called Mobility as a Service, MaaS.
Right.
So this allows people, so for example, Manjula is driving from Gaul to Mahakumbura or Kottava by car. He's parking his car there. So then he will need to reserve parking. He can do that on the app. Then he knows what time he'll get there. He needs a train ticket.
Right.
He can get that on the app. He gets a train ticket. Now that train gets him to Fort railway station. From Fort, he has a meeting at the Chamber of Commerce, and he's a little lazy time-wise to take a bus, so he wants a Uber. So then he calls the Uber. So now in one seamless sort of interaction with the digital app, he has sorted out mobility across different platforms, and now he's at the Chamber of Commerce. You can make this more complicated if he wants to on the way stop and grab lunch somewhere and a reservation at a restaurant. All of these things are added on to this basic sort of digital platform.
Sure.
But I think one of the essential factors when you're trying to get people from private to public transport is to make multimodal transport across different public applications doable in at one place, on one app. You know, you don't want to be calling the bus company and finding out what time does this bus come, and then the train station, and you know, that convenience, the digital convenience needs to be delivered to commuters.
Mr. De Silva, we need to go cashless, don't you think?
I just don't understand why even, you know, that aspect has still not been addressed, where one should be able to just make your payments across all these different transport options with your credit card or the debit card. It should be as simple as that, because today majority of people have a bank issued at least a debit card, right? So you should be able to just tap that card, make your payment, whether in a bus or a train or whatever form of transport that you use. And if there is anybody who doesn't have a bank issued card, I mean, you can always have a dedicated transport card where you can just reload it with cash, just like people do with their phone cards, right?
Sure.
So these are very simple mechanisms, which again I think we have been talking about for a very long time, but unfortunately yet to be implemented. So that is also something which is very, very essential.
Safety or the lack thereof is also one of the main concerns. Also, harassment in public transport. These are issues that sort of have the capacity to cripple almost. How can we address that?
So that is also happening largely due to the overcrowding aspect, right? See, if a bus is not crowded, the potential for harassment will be so much less, right? So that is one aspect. So and also the road discipline, right? The safety concern comes again due to this way of practice of racing one against the other. Actually, I was reading a Harvard Business School case study, which talks about the Sri Lankan bus system as as a model not to follow, right? And where they just highlight this as a case where a case of having too much competition, right? Because normally we think that competition is good, right, for the market, but there are instances where too much competition can be detrimental, and actually this is being highlighted that way. So that is why sometimes there are certain sectors where you don't want competition in the market, but you want competition for the market, right? So that's what I think that bus franchising model can bring about. And also, just to make one more point about the fact that public transport is what we should focus on, because if you are going to have more and more cars and motorcycles coming in, that's going to be an inefficient way of addressing these issues. So you need to focus on public transport, buses and trains, both from an economic point of view as well as from an environmental sustainability point of view. So I want to actually also give you a quote from somebody, very interesting quote, which says that a developed country is not where the poor own cars. It is where the rich use public transport.
Beautiful, and I think that's a brilliant note on which we can end this conversation. Mr. Manjula De Silva and Mr. Sheran Fernando, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next week. Have a safe weekend. Good night.